Ever feel like your life is ruled by routine?
Hmm.
Well, get ready to meet Immanuel Kant.
Okay.
He was this philosopher so punctual that the townspeople supposedly set their clocks by his daily walks.
Wow.
But don't let that fool you. This guy, he was anything but ordinary.
Right.
He's considered one of the absolute most influential thinkers in Western philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And his ideas about knowledge, morality, even the nature of reality, I mean, they're still sparking these huge debates, even centuries later.
Yeah.
And you might think, okay, a guy who lived in the 1700s, what's that got to do with my life?
Right.
But trust me, this deep dive, it's going to show you why Kant is still, rocking our world today.
Yeah, what's really fascinating about Kant is how he totally flipped the script on how we understand our own minds.
Okay.
So before him, a lot of philosophers, they thought our minds were like blank slates,
Okay.
just passively absorbing information from the world around us.
Right, like a mirror.
Exactly, just reflecting what's in front of it.
Yeah.
But Kant, he comes along and says, hold on a second. Our minds, they're not passive at all.
Oh.
They're active. They're shaping how we actually experience reality.
Mm.
He called this his Copernican revolution.
Okay, I love the astronomy reference,
Ah.
but break that down for me a little bit further.
Sure.
What did he mean by Copernican revolution?
So, like Copernicus, right? Like, he blew everyone's minds when he showed that the Earth revolves around the sun.
Right, yeah.
Complete shift in perspective. Total game changer.
Yeah,
Kant, he did something very similar, but in philosophy.
okay.
He argued that, our minds, they aren't just reflecting reality, they're actively structuring our experience of it.
So instead of a mirror, it's more like what?
More like, a pair of glasses
Okay,
with, lenses built in.
okay.
We don't experience the world directly. We experience it through these lenses that our minds are providing. Things like, space, time, causality. These aren't just kind of out there in the world. They're frameworks that our minds use to actually make sense of things.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this is a big deal.
Yeah.
But who was Kant? The man behind the revolution, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Our sources mention he was a bit of a creature of habit.
He was, yeah.
So tell me more about this guy.
Yeah, so Immanuel Kant, he was born in 1724 in Königsberg,
Okay.
which, fun fact, is now Kaliningrad, Russia. And get this, he basically never left.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a homebody.
Wow.
He spent his whole life there, teaching, writing,
Yeah.
and apparently being so punctual that people would set their clocks by his daily walks.
I can relate to a good routine.
Right.
But clearly his mind was anything but ordinary.
Oh, absolutely. He was fascinated by philosophy, math, physics, you name it. He was deeply influenced by the scientific revolution that was going on, especially Newton's work, but also by philosophers like Descartes and Hume. But it actually wasn't until he was in his 50s that he really shook things up
Wow.
with his book, Critique of Pure Reason. Kind of a late bloomer, huh?
Oh, talk about making an entrance.
Right.
So in this book, this is where he lays out his whole mind as lens idea.
Exactly. Kant argued that our minds have these built-in categories,
Okay.
like space, time, causality.
Right.
And they're kind of, pre-programmed.
Okay.
They're not things we learn from experience. They're the structures that make experience possible in the first place.
So give me an example. How does this work in everyday life?
Okay.
How do these lenses shape how we see the world?
Let's say you see a ball rolling across a table, right? You don't just see a random collection of colors and shapes.
Right.
Your mind, it instantly processes that information.
Yeah.
And it interprets it as an object. The ball moving through space across the table over a period of time.
Right.
Those concepts, space, time, causality, those are the lenses that Kant's talking about.
Okay.
We don't just see the world, we interpret it through these mental frameworks.
Right. Okay, that's actually a really helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
So if our minds are always shaping our experience, does that mean we can never really know reality as it truly is?
That is the million-dollar question that Kant wrestled with. And it leads us to one of his most, I think, important distinctions: phenomena versus noumena.
All right, I knew there had to be some more philosophical jargon.
Right.
Walk me through it. What's the difference between phenomena and noumena?
Don't worry, it's not as complicated as it might sound.
Okay.
Kant said there's the world as we experience it, the phenomena, which is always filtered through our mental lenses.
Okay.
But then There's the world as it exists in itself, independent of our minds.
Okay.
The noumena.
And he's saying we can never truly know the noumena.
Yeah.
We can never experience reality as it truly is.
Exactly. It's like trying to describe, I don't know, the taste of a strawberry without using your taste buds. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Our minds are always going to be in the way, so to speak. We can only ever really know the world as it appears to us, not as it truly is in some, ultimate sense.
Whoa. So our knowledge, it has limits.
Yeah.
We're always stuck seeing the world through these, these mental lenses.
That was Kant's big point. And it was a radical idea.
Yeah.
Challenged centuries of philosophical thought.
Wow.
It also leads us to, another fascinating aspect of his philosophy. His ideas about different kinds of knowledge.
Okay.
Analytic versus synthetic, and a priori versus a posteriori.
Okay, you're right. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Sure.
Let's make sure our listeners are fully grasping this whole phenomena versus noumena thing.
Okay.
Because I gotta say, it's pretty mind-bending. It's
Yeah.
really hard to think about the world as something that, we can't fully grasp.
Right.
So how does this relate to us, to our everyday lives?
Well, absolutely. It is a lot to take in. Yeah. And, Kant himself, he acknowledged that the human mind, it naturally wants to understand the noumenal world, to see beyond those limitations.
Yeah.
But he truly believed it was a path that ultimately led to confusion and error.
So where does that leave us? If we
Right.
can't know reality directly, what's the point of even trying to understand the world around us?
Well, for Kant, it wasn't a reason to despair.
Okay.
He believed that even though we can't access the noumena, we can still have this incredibly rich and meaningful knowledge of the phenomenal world.
Okay.
And that knowledge, he argued, has a solid foundation.
Okay.
It's not just arbitrary. It's based on the way our minds are structured to experience the world.
Okay. That's reassuring.
Yeah.
But how did he explain how we gain this knowledge? That's where the whole analytic versus synthetic thing comes in. Right?
Exactly. Kant wanted to figure out how we can have knowledge that's not just, a tautology. In other words, knowledge that actually tells us something new about the world.
Okay.
And to do that, he came up with these very specific categories of knowledge.
This is where I usually start to get lost in philosophy, all the jargon.
Sure.
But I trust you to guide us through it.
Okay.
So tell me, what are these different categories of knowledge?
Okay.
And how do they connect to our experience of the world? All right, so let's unpack these different categories of knowledge that Kant identified. You mentioned analytic and synthetic propositions. And I gotta admit, those terms, they always sound a bit intimidating to me.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
They can sound a bit jargony,
Right.
but they're actually not that difficult to grasp once you kind of break them down.
Okay.
So analytic propositions, these are statements that are true by definition.
Okay.
Like all squares have four sides.
Okay, so it's like saying a bachelor is an unmarried man. It's true just because of what the words mean. We're not really learning anything new about the world. We're just kind of unpacking the meaning of a concept.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with synthetic proposition.
Okay.
These are statements that add new information to our understanding, like the sky is blue.
Right. To know if that's true, we actually have to go outside and look. It's not something that we can figure out just by thinking about, what the words sky and blue mean.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So we've got analytic propositions, which are true by definition, and then we've got synthetic propositions, which tell us something new about the world.
Okay.
Now, Kant adds another layer to this.
Okay.
He introduces this distinction between a priori and a posteriori knowledge.
Right. You mentioned those terms earlier.
Yeah.
Remind me, what's the difference?
So a priori knowledge is knowledge that's independent of experience.
Okay.
It's something we know intuitively.
Yeah.
We don't have to rely on our senses or observations. Think about mathematical truths like 2 + 2 = 4.
Right.
You don't need to conduct experiments or gather data to know that that's true. It's a truth that's just accessible through pure reason.
It's inherently true no matter what.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A posteriori knowledge, on the other hand, that's knowledge that's based on experience.
Okay.
It's something we learn by observing the world around us.
So water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
Right.
We need to actually observe that to know it's true. We can't just figure that out in our heads.
Yeah, exactly. Now, here's where Kant brings it all together in a really kind of mind-blowing way.
Okay.
He says that there's a special kind of knowledge.
Okay.
It's both synthetic, meaning it tells us something new about the world, and a priori, meaning it's independent of experience.
Okay.
He calls this synthetic a priori knowledge.
Wait, how is that even possible? It seems like those two things, they contradict each other.
Yeah.
How can we know something without, like, having experienced it, but at the same time, it's not just, like, a matter of definition?
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's a really tricky concept.
Yeah.
But Kant argues that this type of knowledge is possible because it's based on the way our minds are structured. He says that our minds come equipped with these, like, fundamental categories.
Okay.
Like space-time causality.
Right.
They're pre-programmed.
Okay.
These categories, we don't learn them from experience. They're the very structures that make experience possible in the first place.
So it's like these categories, they're like the operating system of our minds.
Yeah.
Like the software that allows us to make sense of the world around us.
Exactly. And because we have these built-in categories, Kant argues we can make certain judgments about the world that are both synthetic and a priori.
Okay, give me an example. What's a piece of knowledge that would fit into that category, being both synthetic and a priori?
Think about the idea of time moving forward.
Okay.
We all experience time as flowing in one direction.
Right.
From the past to the present to the future. But we don't learn this from experience. It's not like we observe time moving forward in the same way that we observe, a car driving down the street.
That's true. It's more like a fundamental assumption that we have about how the world works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Kant would say that this understanding of time is an example of synthetic a priori knowledge.
Okay.
It's synthetic because it tells us something meaningful about the world. Time has a direction, but it's also a priori because we don't arrive at this understanding through experience. It's something that our minds just inherently grasp because of those built-in categories.
Wow. Okay. So through these fundamental categories that shape our understanding, we can actually gain new knowledge about the world even without, like, directly experiencing it. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
But I can also see how it can get really complex really fast.
Right.
Let's maybe shift gears for a moment and talk about another area where Kant made a really huge impact, and that's morality.
Absolutely.
Right.
Kant's ethical theories are just as influential, I think, as his work on, epistemology, the study of knowledge.
Right.
And what's really intriguing
What's that?
is that Kant saw a strong connection between these two seemingly very different areas of his philosophy.
Oh, tell me more about that. How did he connect knowledge and morality?
Well, at the heart of Kant's moral philosophy is this idea of the categorical imperative.
Right. You mentioned that earlier. I have to admit, the term categorical imperative, it always sounds kind of intimidating.
Right.
Could you refresh my memory on what exactly that is?
Of course. So the categorical imperative, it's basically Kant's attempt to establish a universal moral law.
Okay.
It's a principle that he believes should guide our actions, no matter what our own personal desires might be, or the specific circumstances that we find ourselves in.
So it's not about following rules because somebody told us to, or because we're afraid of the consequences.
Right.
It's about acting in accordance with, like, a higher moral principle.
Exactly. Kant believed that as rational beings, we have the capacity to figure out what's morally right through reason alone.
And that's where the categorical imperative comes in. It's like this internal moral compass.
Yes.
But it's based on reason, not just emotions or, what society tells us is right and wrong.
Precisely. One of the most, I think, famous formulations of the categorical imperative goes like this. Act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law.
Okay, that's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
Break that down for me.
Okay.
What does it mean to will something to be a universal law?
It essentially means asking yourself, would I want everyone to act this way? If the answer is no, then that action is probably not morally permissible, even if it seems beneficial to you in the short term.
So it's like thinking, if everyone acted this way, would it create a better world or a worse world?
Exactly. Let's say, for example, you're thinking about cheating on a test.
Okay.
Now, you might think, well, it would help me get a better grade. It's just one test, so what's the harm?
Right.
But the categorical imperative, it pushes us to think beyond just that immediate situation.
Right.
So if everyone cheated on tests, the whole system of education would completely crumble. Grades would be meaningless, trust would erode, and ultimately everyone would be worse off.
Right.
So even though cheating might seem tempting in the moment, Kant would argue that it's morally wrong because it violates this principle of universalizability.
So it's about considering the bigger picture,
Yes.
the impact that our actions would have if everyone adopted them as like a universal rule.
Exactly.
That's a really powerful concept.
It is.
Are there other examples that Kant used to like illustrate the categorical imperative? So we've explored Kant's categorical imperative and how it relates to like, these universal moral principles.
Right.
But how did Kant apply this idea of universalizability to other areas of life? Like our relationships with other people, for example.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to, I think, another really key aspect of Kant's ethics. His emphasis on treating people as ends in themselves and never as mere means.
So basically not using people just to get what we want.
Exactly. Kant, he believed that every rational being has this, like, intrinsic worth.
Okay.
And that we should never treat other people as mere instruments to achieve our own goals.
Right.
Even if those goals, seem noble or justified in some way.
Can you, give me an example of what that would look like in practice?
Sure. Let's say you're, asking a friend for a favor.
Okay.
Now, there's a difference between, asking for help because you genuinely value their friendship, you value their support.
Right.
And asking simply because you see them as a means to an end, like, getting something that you need.
So the intention behind our actions, that matters to Kant.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's not just about what we do, but why we do it. For Kant, acting morally, it means recognizing that inherent dignity in every person.
Okay.
And treating them with that respect, regardless of their social status, their usefulness to us, or any other kind of external factor.
That's a really powerful idea.
Yeah.
It really challenges us to, examine our motivations and make sure we're not just using people to get ahead.
It does. And this principle of treating people as ends in themselves, it's had a profound impact on everything from, human rights to our understanding of what it means to have an ethical relationship.
It's incredible to think how Kant's ideas, from centuries ago,
I know. Yeah.
they still resonate with so much force today.
It really is. And what's fascinating is that Kant's own life, in a way, it embodies this tension between the universal and the particular.
What do you mean?
Well, so you have this guy who lived this incredibly structured life.
Right.
Right, never venturing far from his hometown. He was famous for his routines, right? We talked about that.
Yeah.
But he was also this philosophical giant whose ideas have shaped the way we think about morality, about knowledge, about the very nature of reality.
It's almost paradoxical. How can someone who lives such a, structured, routine-driven life
I know.
also be, advocating for these, these grand universal principles? It's a great question. And I think it highlights the fact that for Kant, it wasn't just about these abstract theories.
Right.
He was really trying to live out his philosophy in a very practical, down-to-earth way.
So maybe his routines weren't a sign of rigidity.
Yeah.
But rather an expression of his commitment to actually living a principled life.
Exactly.
Okay.
He believed in the power of reason to guide our actions.
Right.
And for him, that meant creating a structure that allowed him to really live in accordance with those principles.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about being spontaneous or chaotic.
Right.
It's about finding freedom, but within a framework of reason and morality.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really valuable lesson in that for us today.
Yeah.
In a world that often feels, overwhelming, unpredictable.
Yeah.
There's something I think really grounding, really empowering about Kant's emphasis on reason, on moral principles as guiding forces in our lives. Absolutely. It's a reminder that we have the capacity to make choices.
Yes.
To actually shape our own destinies, even amidst, all the chaos.
Exactly. Yeah. And that those choices, they have ripple effects.
Right.
They can contribute to a more just and ethical world, just like Kant envisioned.
That's a powerful thought to kind of end on.
It is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of Immanuel Kant, what's the one big takeaway you hope our listeners will carry with them?
For me, it comes back to Kant's belief in the power of human reason. He really believed that we as rational beings, we have this incredible capacity to understand the world around us.
Right.
To figure out what's right and wrong, and to create a more just, a more peaceful society.
It's an inspiring vision for sure.
It really is. And even though the world can feel pretty, chaotic and uncertain at times, I think there's something deeply reassuring about Kant's message.
Yeah.
This idea that we're not just adrift in a sea of randomness.
Yeah.
We have the power to shape our own destinies, to make choices that are guided by reason, by compassion.
It's a powerful reminder that we have more agency than we often realize,
Yeah.
and that even our smallest actions can have a meaningful impact on the world around us.
Absolutely.
Well, on that inspiring note, we'll leave you to ponder the enduring wisdom of Immanuel Kant.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.